Can you start by sort of painting the picture for us when it comes to progress on global vaccines and treatments? What are you seeing and what's most likely to emerge?
It has been absolutely unbelievable how fast the global pharmaceutical industry has worked to take on this coronavirus. I think that probably what we would see first is a therapeutic. There are trials already underway on experimental medicines that were in development before this even came about. And everybody's gone back through their pipeline of products to see if there's anything that's on the market available already that might be beneficial. So even in the next couple of months, we might see treatments should everything work beautifully. For vaccines, it's going to be at least a year. There's about 24 in development, and we're just going to have to wait and see.
Serge, would you echo that? In as little as 2 months, we could see treatment?
Yes, if we're repurposing existing drugs, that's something that could happen. And there's definitely a lot of work, a lot of clinical trials going on right now in parallel all around the world, trying to find those kinds of treatments to repurpose existing drugs. Developing new drugs will take longer. There's still some very promising approaches, especially ones that are based around making drugs using antibodies from patients that have recovered. Those are not going to happen immediately, but in several months, we could have potentially pretty effective therapeutics.
Talk to us a little bit more about how these antibodies treatments would work. I mean, we've heard about antibodies from COVID-19 in particular, folks using antibodies from SARS patients as well.
Yeah, I think, again, the science is still very preliminary at this point, although scientists and researchers around the world are racing really fast forward to understand all the pieces of this puzzle. I would say the most promising avenue would be to take antibodies from recovered COVID-19 patients, so not so much the SARS sort of classic disease patients, and use kind of peer into those into the blood generated by those patients to pick out the antibodies that they have generated that can bind the virus, and then kind of turn on the manufacturing to make those kind of drugs that are very similar to those antibodies to actually give as treatment or as prophylaxis to people against the COVID-19 virus.
Meantime, Michelle, let's talk a little bit more about a vaccine, which, we're talking 18 months potentially out. At the same time, we're seeing the lockdown and in Wuhan, but, almost 2,000 deaths in a single day in the United States. Given that, should lockdowns be ending? Should folks, even in China, feel comfortable leaving their houses?
The truth of the matter is we're not going to be protected against this virus until you have some kind of immunity built up, either individually or enough of it in the community that the virus isn't spreading. There's only two ways that we know to do that. That's to actually have the infection and come out of it, or to be immunized. So the alternative is literally staying in your house for 18 months until we have a vaccine.
Serge, you were shaking their head there when I talked about the lockdown in Wuhan ending. Do you think it's too soon? And how do we find this happy medium? Or is there a happy medium between now and 18 months from now?
Well, I guess I'll preface it by saying I'm not sure how much information we have actually coming out of China and how much of that information we can trust. So I think we should take all of that with a grain of salt. As far as I would echo Michelle's points around, ending lockdowns, I think it would be super dangerous to do that now, obviously. We really need to get the case numbers way, way down from where they are right now. And we need to have massive testing in place before we can allow any kind of normalization or, kind of starting to get back on the road to normalization.
So Serge, 10x is working with scientists around the world and also scientists in China. Curious what you're seeing from your Chinese counterparts and if you have any more indication of what the real numbers are like there, what the real situation is like there.
Yeah, it's hard for us to tell. We are so what 10x does is provide tools, technologies, tools for scientists to understand biology, to kind of work out, and specifically for COVID, to understand how the virus actually infects humans, what is the immune response, how would different treatments potentially work, understand the severe cases versus mild cases, kind of what is going on with the biology. And so we sell our products to the scientists and researchers over there. And all the initial COVID research was happening in China, going back to January and February. And so there was a lot of science that was coming out with initial publications were all coming out of China. And they're finding things. And now there's much more of this kind of research around the world. It's hard for us to tell precisely, obviously, the case numbers or anything like that. We do know that there's a lot of research that's happening there and all around the world now.
So then what's your sort of best estimate about a return to normalcy, or at least being able to leave our houses? I mean, how far out is this really? If, treatments are still far out, vaccine is far out, and this whole idea of herd immunity is kind of unrealistic right now.
Yeah, so you have to be very careful right now. And it's, in many ways, it's anybody's guess. As I mentioned, I think you need to get the case numbers much further down than they currently are in the United States. And that's going to take, some number of weeks, quite potentially, maybe even months. And you need to have widespread testing. That's really, really important. You need to have widespread testing in place so that you can tell what is actually going on with the spread of the virus, so that you can prevent what's happening in New York happening again elsewhere. And so that's going to be kind of our life for the next at least several months. We're going to be monitoring things very carefully. We have to monitor the numbers, and we're going to, be looking at all the different outbreaks. And hopefully, in not too distant future, kind of medium term, several months, we will start seeing some of these therapeutics emerging to start addressing the epidemic.
Michelle, how likely is a resurgence, even in places that have calmed down, whether it's China or, it looks like we're seeing that now in Japan, whether it's in the fall or at some other point where we think that things have gotten better, but actually we could see new hotspots once we've passed the so-called peak?
The true answer, I haven't talked to a single scientist who doesn't expect a second surge.
Surge? No pun intended.
I'm not going to be an exception to the rule. So yes, I would say that it's hard to imagine that there's not going to be additional outbreaks and epidemics after second and third waves of this until we get to a vaccine. And I guess that, like, on the positive side, the one thing I want to just emphasize and underscore, I've never seen in my lifetime so many scientists just across the world, so much of biological community just singularly focused on a single task and a single goal. And it's unfortunate it takes like an epidemic of this pandemic of this proportion to make that happen, but it is truly inspiring. Just the amount of focus, amount of commitment, and also just kind of common sharing of data and common purpose that's happening around the world.
And just my last question to you, Serge, since 10x is deemed an essential business, so you still have scientists and workers going into work. What are they doing, and how are you sort of navigating that?
Yeah, no, so that's a huge challenge, obviously, for us. And it's something that we thought about deeply and had to think very quickly as this pandemic was exploding. So our first priority is make sure our employees are as safe as they possibly can be. And we actually, in fact, have a presence. We have an office in Singapore, so we had some early kind of data about how we should set up things over here. And we learned a lot from them, and still are learning because they're kind of ahead of the world there. And so our first priority is to make sure we can keep our manufacturing operations going so that our customers can get their products. We're also looking, some of our R&D people are coming in and to work on developing the products that we see in the near term can make a big impact on this pandemic. So that's our overriding imperative, and it's a challenge, no question around that.